I think publishing as a business itself will interact a lot more with different kinds of companies. We'll interact maybe more with an Audible, with a Spotify, with Bound. Interesting times ahead. Think of it as you basically hired a narrator to just read it for you. You've outsourced the job to him or her. Just read it out to me, and it's you put your earphones on. You're probably walking or you're on the treadmill, and the book is being read to you. People are going to consume it the way they want. I have a Kindle. I don't have space in my house to buy any more physical books, so I'm just going to stick to my Kindle.
Welcome to the Book People, where I decode India's media and publishing industries and uncover the latest developments and the biggest opportunities for writers and creative professionals in India today. I'm your host, Aishwarya. I'm a writer, book editor, podcast producer, overall media person, and the head of originals at Bound. Today, we're talking about new media. So, in the last 5 years, publishing has seen a boom of books being converted into other formats. And obviously, audiobooks are on a rise. More and more people are listening to audiobooks. You have these huge platforms like Audible and Storytel come into India. And even a lot of books are being adapted for screen, right? Whether it's for films, whether it's for TV series or your OTT platforms. And what I want to focus on is not just, why these books are being adapted, but how publishers themselves are identifying the opportunity and are investing more and more into making sure that their books get converted into these different platforms. So for that reason, I am talking today to Arcopol Chaudhuri. He is the executive editor of rights and new media at HarperCollins, and he specializes especially in audio and film licensing rights. So we talk about how flexible this crossover between the publishing and media industries really is. And he also shares how he came to be in this very promising and growing part of the industry, right? Because he was at the right place at the right time. And he also shares what parameters they use to decide which books work well for audio and which books work well for screen. So let's tune in. So hi Arcopol, welcome to the Book People.
Hi Aishwarya. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to talk to you because, this is sort of the new thing that everyone's talking about in publishing right now, whether it's, new media, whether it's the potential of audiobooks or books being adapted to screen. So in a way, you work with two very opposing things for authors. One is the exciting new opportunities, which are these audiobook screen things. And on the other hand, with contracts and rights, which I think are the biggest sort of pain point or anxiety point for authors when it comes to thinking about publishing books. So my first question to you is, what exactly does your role entail?
Okay. My role primarily entails looking for opportunities for taking an author's work and finding new avenues to, adapt it. And that could be translated editions, that could be as audiobook editions, that could be as, book to screen opportunities. And those things primarily are what we call new media, but you could call them as what we call as derivatives. I mean, an author's work is something that, he or she creates. It can have life in various forms. And it can allow people the freedom to choose which form to consume. So someone may consume it as an ebook, someone may consume it as an audiobook, someone may, choose to go directly and watch the, the screen adaptation of it. They may not even read the book. And I think it's an evolving space. It's a space that I think in the last 5 years or so has picked up a lot of pace and in terms of developments within India.
Yeah.
However, that was not the case, say in mature publishing markets like the US or the UK. And I actually came into the space, say about 6 years ago. I think in 2016, if I'm not wrong. Prior to that, I was a copy editor. My work involved basic, line by line editing of books and making sure they go to press, working with the author, and sticking to a certain timeline and a publication schedule. I think I was probably very lucky to come into the whole rights space at a time when the space was poised to become interesting and full of new opportunities. I think for authors, it's a great time where these avenues exist. I think 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have heard of, audiobooks and in the manner that we hear of right now. I mean, and I think largely that has to do with the fact that there are proper, legit audiobook streaming platforms available in the country at prices that Indians can afford. The film industry, for example, has matured and is a lot more organized in terms of actually reaching out and actually obtaining the rights to a book and not merely sort of, lifting a story without, consent or, an illegal sort of a copy of it. I mean, you must have heard of the whole, chatter around Pasuri in Kartik Aaryan's new film, and it seems like everyone's sort of very enraged, like what is happening, how has this been allowed? But what is that is exactly what rights and licensing is. The rights of the song have been licensed in a manner, and every party in that transaction is fully aware of what they're doing. It's not like as if Ali Sethi has been wronged in any way. I think every content creator or every writer should be aware or is aware when they're writing or creating something new that what they create has certain derivatives, and those derivatives can be licensed in an appropriate, legit manner for a sum that seems reasonable or against royalties or whatever the profit sharing terms are agreed upon. So that is the space which we are in, and I'm very fortunate to be in that space at the moment because some of my colleagues really envy my profile and they say, hey, I love your job. But the truth of the matter is I do love my job. I mean, I remember, I think about 10 years ago when I came to HarperCollins for my interview, and one of the first things I was told after the interview looked at my CV was, hey, you've been jumping around a bit. And I was 27, 28 around that time. And I think the 20s are that sort of a time where you do want to explore what's really the right fit for you. And prior to joining HarperCollins, I was a journalist. I'd worked also in a social media firm. I'd worked in a PR firm for about 2 weeks. So I was really looking out for what's really my calling. But I was fortunate to come to HarperCollins and really find a place where I really felt like I really want to go to work and do what I'm doing. And I think that's one of the joys of publishing and working with books. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I think the whole ecosystem is such right now that a lot of crossover is happening. I mean, books, stories are crossing over into, say, long form podcasts.
Arcopol, you're answering all the questions that I have planned for you for the rest of this episode.
So I'm just going to touch upon. So there's a lot of crossover happening, and I think it's a great time to be in the space right now. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Agree with you. I think a lot of exciting things are happening right now, like you said, in, looking at different formats and books evolving in different formats. I think even for the screen, the sort of film industry or OTT industry is also really realizing the value that, a good, like a well-written book has, where they can take those scripts, and the value of, I think, storytelling as well, how important that is in the ultimate sort of creation of that final output that comes on screen. I think more and more they are realizing it, and more they're also looking towards books to provide those ready, well-written stories. I think definitely that opportunity is very interesting. And also, I think authors are starting to get a little more knowledgeable or a little more savvy about, what are the possibilities that something they write can have in different formats, and how they can take, advantage of that. So that is also something that I want to touch upon later. But coming back to exactly what you said, I saw that, you have worked as a journalist, you worked at DNA, you also, like you said, you worked in PR. I think you did a little bit of marketing as well. So how has all of that ultimately led you to editorial in a way, right, at HarperCollins? Because I think a lot of people who want to work with books or with stories who are in media are trying to sort of figure out that journey. And sometimes there tends to be, this assumption that, okay, you have to follow a certain path in order to enter publishing. Like you need to have that English graduate, like
Yeah.
bachelor's degree, English master's degree, and then enter publishing only as an editor. So since you have had such a different journey, what has that been like for you? And how did you take that opportunity?
Honestly, I've always felt the imposter syndrome being in publishing because I do not have the conventional lit, or an art,
Literary background.
literary background or an arts degree,
Hmm.
or a humanities. I mean, I think I'm not from that space. So I graduated with Bachelor of Mass Media, which is a course offered by Mumbai University.
Yeah.
And the day my final exams got over, I began working the next day, because I'd found, a decent sort of a writing sort of an opportunity, and at that time we really needed the money, and I really wanted to be really like a journalist for the longest time, because at that time journalism was hot in
Yeah.
in Bombay. Just I mean, DNA was a newspaper, a new newspaper in Bombay. Hindustan had launched new editions. You nowadays you hear of editions shutting down. At that time, the space was so hot that you heard new editions being launched. Every 7-8 months, or a new news channel being launched. And I think when I joined HarperCollins, incidentally, I did not join in editorial. At that time, I was taken into the marketing team, and it was a
Yes.
profile that was created. It was corporate sales and retail. Um, it was a space I knew very little about. And I had just moved on from Fingerprint, which is an imprint of Prakash Books. It's an imprint which is incidentally doing very well at the moment.
Yeah.
And it was the hunger to sort of learn something new that I said, okay, let me just enter and see what's in it for me, and how can I contribute. But I think, given my inclination towards writing and journalism, I always wanted to sort of move to editorial at some point of time. And somehow or the other, the stars sort of aligned. And I appeared for a copy test, and I sort of eventually made the transition. Um, and I think a copy test is obviously the first test of sorts, which sort of really filters out, who who gets the chance to edit a book and who does not get a chance to edit a book. And I think most publishing houses have that as a process. No matter how senior you are, there is a copy test you appear for. Some people don't like it, but it is what it is. And you'd be surprised that we've often found a lot of very senior people not passing that copy test. And I came from a very simple background of, I loved reading books. My English was functional, and I managed to sort of pass the copy test, and then I made the transition. And I think from there on, it's just been, being with the written word, being with, working with authors, understanding that publishing is a very author-centric process. It's really the author's work, and you really eventually have to respect the author's decision. Journalism is very sort of rigid because you feel you are this righteous person, who knows what's right for society, and you're going to change the world. You are a bit anal about your copy being sort of edited by a desk editor or something like that. But I think in publishing, you sort of see the other side of it. You because you become like an editor to someone who's written that work. So you really want to respect their process and their thinking. And there have been so many books where editors have edited sentences out, and the author has said stet. Just leave it as it is. It's fine. That's the way I want it to be. And I think my current profile is, I mean, you could say it's a sum of all the experiences that have sort of led to this. I mean, journalism gave me a good ringside view of how the media works. I think corporate sales and retail gave me a good introduction of how the retail side of things work. And I think I must acknowledge Mr. Gaurav Sabharwal, who was sort of my mentor, because I transitioned from journalism to publishing at Fingerprint. And for me to get such a good understanding of how the on-ground distribution of books work, how the retail side of things work, I think I learned that when I worked with Prakash Books. And I think I sort of brought that sort of learning to publishing. So even now, I'm someone who enjoys just having that casual chat with the salesperson, or just chatting with the marketing person, or, on understanding how things are going, what are the challenges they're facing. So I try not to isolate myself doing just what I'm doing. Conventionally, editors tend to work in silos, and editorial is largely a very independent sort of a job. It's just you, the text that you're working with. You have a style sheet that you're working with. You're figuring out this, the right footnotes and all of those things. And you're working with the author. And, largely you can work independently. It's not so much of a team job. But I think what I like is the larger parts of publishing. So one of the things I noticed in Bound, that you'd put up a post recently of, the other jobs that are outside of editorial. I thought that's a very, very good post, because I think most people approach publishing as editor. That's it.
Yeah.
And honestly, the editor really is the heart of the process. The editor reads the book, falls in love with it, decides to, sign up the author. But then before signing up the author, he has to make a convincing pitch internally to sales, marketing, and the publishing team to say that, hey, I really like this book. And I think we should publish it for these reasons. And this is how it's going to help. And this is how much I think it should sell. So yes, I mean, the editor is really the heart of the process. And even after the book is published, the editor is that one sort of a, helpline of sorts for the author, where, the author's, anxieties, the author's concerns, the editor is the one who really pushes things through. But I like the fact that I'm able to sort of get a full big picture view of how the process works. And you'd be surprised of how much work actually goes behind the scenes. I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much as I do had I not had, different sorts of experiences leading up to this role.
Yeah. Because they sort of help you do this role today, right? Like have that sort of broader perspective of what you need to do, or maybe even different ways of looking at the book as well, right? Which is obviously there is, the one aspect of the book being the book or the manuscript, and the editorial aspect. And I think our idea with that post as well, right, was very much, because so many people want to work with books because we love books so much. Like that has sort of been the entry point, or the aspirational entry point into the publishing world. But, people might not be, like you said, like very good at English, or, they might not just not have those particular editorial skills as such that are needed. And so for people to just know that there are these different kinds of options, right, like they can focus on their strength within the industry with their love for books, and kind of enter the industry as well. And I definitely, feel with you when you talk about the imposter syndrome. Like I definitely relate, because I think a lot of people feel that way, right, about whichever industry. Especially I think publishing is something that can feel that way. And I've actually, a lot of people that I've interviewed even for this series have had very unusual, unconventional paths into publishing, right? Like the very first episode with Shayantan Ghosh, even he, right, he studied economics, he went into academic publishing, then he entered publishing. Even with Disha Nayak, she was working in finance, and from there she entered publishing into marketing. So I find it very interesting, because we all have this idea of there being this linear journey, but most people I'm speaking to don't have linear journeys. They have these very interesting journeys, and always they speak about how that journey has, the experiences that they've had with these different roles really help with the role that they're doing today, and sort of give them perspective in the role today. So I find that very fascinating.
Yeah.
But so in today's role, what does a day in your life look like?
So a typical day would largely be composed of the following. Once you reach office, you've sort of settled down with a cup of coffee, you've checked your emails, and those are hygiene stuff. I'm not focusing on that. But largely you are looking at, so publishing is all about pre-planning. So at this moment, I know what are the books that we're going to publish over the next 12 to 18 months. And I also obviously know, what books have been published, what books are in stock, what books have copies available, and what books are, in stores. Because we have a proper system and a process where that information is circulated amongst, the stakeholders. So a lot of it is planning and figuring out which books have what potential. So we have a team. For example, I look after audio and book to screen. That's like really my focus area. My colleague Ridhima, she looks after Indian language translations. My colleague Paulami, she sort of sees, supervises the whole thing. And we also work closely with the contracts team. So just for clarity, I'm not the one person who sort of is responsible for the authors getting signed into HarperCollins. We have a contracts team for that.
Yeah.
And they're really the one with sort of legal sort of expertise. But by virtue of working with rights, you're required to sort of understand the legalities of a contract. What are the terms to agree for? What are the terms not to agree for? So let's say I'm looking at a list of books that's going to be published monthly for the next 6 months or the next 1 year. And I will have to identify which are the big hitters for me. Which are the books, for example, that going by the storyline, the title, the profile, and the rights that have been granted to HarperCollins, I can go after.
What do you usually look for? Like, what are your parameters for, say, a book that you think would work really well in audio versus a book that you think would work really well on screen?
Okay. For audio, I think we look at what are the genres that are doing well in audio. So, for example, the genres that at the moment in India do well are self-development, history, motivational stuff. I think horror does pretty well. Biographies do well, and books on business or business biographies or business turnarounds, they tend to do well. One of the best books that we published in audio last year was the biography of a failed venture. You could never imagine that a book that the people would want to read the biography of a failed venture, but it's one of the very best-selling reads on audio. And those really are those are things I'm marking in an Excel sheet, which really has the titles listed out, figuring out which are the ones to sort of, outline and shortlist for, audio production. And, after I made that list, I sort of identified when do we publish those books, which are the studios we would work with, what are the narrators, we'll sort of audition, and whom we'll sort of finalize. So that all is, deep diving into the processes one by one.
So for audiobooks, HarperCollins does the production before going to, say, an Audible or a Storytel?
At the moment, we do. I think in 2016 or 2017, we weren't sure if we wanted to produce the audio ourselves. So we felt like the right thing to do was to, license the rights to, one of these, audio platforms. And I think in the middle of the pandemic, we felt like the time was right to really invest in our own production. And I think one of the reasons why we did that was because I think the authors really also wanted the audiobook to be available on all platforms. So if you license a book to a platform, they'll have exclusive rights only on that platform. So let's say a book is licensed to Storytel. Someone might say, hey, I don't have a Storytel subscription. I have an Audible subscription. When is my book going to be on Audible? And it's, it's a bit of a bummer that it's not available on Audible, or Audible has not expressed interest in acquiring that book's rights. Audible has said, okay, we'll pass. We don't want that. So either of those things. But when we produce it ourselves, we are able to distribute it on all platforms. So it's a bit like, my book being available on Amazon, but not Flipkart. And we decided to just eliminate that and said, it's going to be available everywhere, wherever audiobooks are sold. So that's the audio part of it. For film, most of the job is building relationships, because you're talking to producers, you're talking to studios, you're talking to people who are acquiring content for studios and really figuring out what is their mandate. What has Netflix told them? What are the genres they should sort of be seeing? What are the ones they should go after? And it's really building those relationships and finding out, okay, this book could be, say, the right fit for what you're looking for. I have a thriller that features a female, detective or a female cop. And probably there are 3 books in the series. So I can probably at least indicate that there will be multiple seasons of the show. Maybe there's, say, a period drama, say, it's like Manu Pillai's Ivory Throne, which, you can definitely expand into 4 or 5 seasons of really good content. So it's identifying those books in your publishing list and seeing which are the books that will probably, have a higher chance of converting. There are obviously books where, there is definitely a great story, it's very compelling, but it may not be the flavor of the season. And the thing about the book to screen space is that sometimes there is a flavor of the season. And I think the flavor of the season for the last 2 years has been, based on true events, true crime, real accounts, horror to some extent, even though, it's not something that does really great numbers, but it still seems people want to watch horror if it's, well done. Rom-coms, of course, anything that's based on true accounts and true events, because I think what the film industry looks at in publishing or books is the research on which a producer can confidently say, hey, look, I trust the book. I think the book has events in it which I can depend on to build a screenplay. And I can obviously dramatize it a bit, I'm taking those liberties. So, so you have Scam, 1992, based on a book, and the new Scam, which is on the Telgi scandal that's coming up in September. So we're going to be...
People love scams.
Yeah. So it is. So if you see even a show that, We Crashed, I recently finished watching We Crashed. It's based on a Wondery podcast, and you see that in the credits, and you feel, wow, what an amazing transition from, someone must have done the research for the podcast, and they probably wouldn't have thought, this is going to eventually make way for a film. So those are sort of the genres that, are hot and happening. But I think a genre for all seasons is crime and thriller. Even if you look at books as a space, crime fiction is the highest selling genre. It's the bread and butter of, the publishing business. So I think when I'm sort of planning and identifying those, I'm really figuring out which are the ones to go after. Who are the producers to whom I should highlight specific books? And then working with authors to sort of, build a proper pitch and, making sure the industry is aware of that these books are coming up. So that's largely the heart of the job. After which comes the more tricky part, which is when you negotiate. You're negotiating deals, you're negotiating contracts, you're making sure the author is happy with the terms that you offered. And you're making sure the author has confidence in the process, because as a publisher, we at HarperCollins, we do not proceed on anything without an author's approval. It's eventually the author's book, it's the author's work. There have been times when an author has said, look, I think it's a good offer for, a film deal, but I'm not certain the producer is the right fit for what I'm looking for. And I've tried to convince them to say that, okay, why don't you give it a shot? But at his or her gut, if he or she feels that, this is not the right fit, we respect that decision. It's not something that we do. And I think once the deals are done, then one has to push for, invoicing, making sure the monies come in on time, and ensuring that the terms are fair. The author is not being taken for granted in terms of, it's not a one-sided agreement. I think that's one of the strengths we bring to the whole negotiation process. Sometimes agreements tend to be very one-sided.
Yeah.
Sure, a lot of agreements are templated across the industry, but still it's an agreement, and it's called an agreement for a reason, because you and I agree on something. It's not called, notice, where, it's I'm not notifying you that these are the terms. It's an agreement. So there's always room for negotiation. So, and I think the recent writer's strike in America is kind of, it's really an indication of where things will go in the future. And I think the day is not far when, writers in India, screenwriters, will ask for more than their share of things.
Do you want to work in India's publishing and creative industries and be one of these cool book people that I interview in this podcast? Well, now you can. We at Bound have come up with a 3-month comprehensive online course that gives you the skills and helps you get jobs in your dream companies, whether they are book publishers, magazines, literary agents, digital publishing platforms, or any other content company. So this course starts on 15 September. And essentially in 100 live hours, we will be teaching you every single aspect of the publishing industry, and you will get to specialize in a particular field of your choice. You will learn from over 70 top experts from the industry and a lot of the book people themselves. So imagine you could be learning directly from Sayantan Ghosh, from Naveen Valsakumar, Chitranshu Tiwari, Radhika Timbadia, Disha Nayak, and many, many more experts. In addition to this, you can test your newfound skills in a capstone simulation that we'll be holding at the end of the course. And we will be giving you the chance to actually interview with the top companies in India. So we are hosting a 2-week recruitment drive, and in the drive, you will get to interview with companies like Notion Press, Cactus Communications, Rupa Publications, Little Black Book, and we have over 17 recruitment partners already signed up with us to give you jobs. And I haven't even mentioned the best part yet. We'll only be conducting classes on weekday evenings and on weekends, mornings, so that you can make sure that you can continue your studies, you can keep your full-time job, you can keep your weekend plans while you're doing this course as well. And don't worry, we've also accounted for Diwali and all of the festivals that will come up during those 3 months between September and December. Obviously, you will see me there as one of the core instructors. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at Bound India on all social media platforms. You will find the details in the description below. And I really hope that you will take this opportunity and use it to really build your career in the publishing industry and in the creative industries. Apply now.
The general publishing contract is, I'm talking of publishing contracts for major publishing houses. They have already captured what the Writers Guild in America is asking for from producers, which means whatever derivatives emerge from a book, an author gets some share of each of those derivatives.
Yeah.
And that's already part of, say, a standard decent publishing agreement in India. I mean, the ratios and the percentages might vary, so those things are negotiable, which is why the industry depends on royalties, right? It's a very royalties-driven model. So let's say you've written a book and you're getting an X percentage of royalties, and let's say for the first 3 years the book hasn't done, it's an okay business, but there might come a time in the future when something sort of triggers the sales to sort of really shoot up, and that's when you can benefit from it. And it's lifetime, right? As long as the book is in print, the author or the author's heir or the author's estates, I mean, they can continue to benefit from it.
Yeah,
I think I like publishing for that reason. It's not I mean, say, the film industry, the music industry, for example, the songwriters, for example, there was a landmark judgment with Javed Akhtar sort of led. So all those are fights in the good direction, but I'm glad that publishing sort of really captures all of those things for the author.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think when it comes to writers at this point in India, publishing seems to have the fairest, like book publishing seems to have the fairest contracts in comparison, because I also have seen a lot of, especially in the content and media industry, with a lot of companies coming up, whether it's audio, video, like screen production companies. I have come across a lot of very, very one-sided contracts. And a lot of times, writers don't know, like, because it's a lot of like legal terminology, right? And it's very difficult to catch red flags or know that they're giving copyright away a lot of times completely, right? So forget royalties or the duration in which they can get royalties, but a lot of times they don't even realize that they're completely giving away copyright and essentially becoming salaried content writers for ideas that they have created, like things that they've written from scratch. So things like that have definitely been happening, and authors need to beware of that. As especially, I think this fluidity is increasing, right, between different formats. Like you mentioned, We Crashed. That was also going to be one of my questions. For example, there was Serial, right, which was again a podcast, became a book, became a series. There has been Lore, which again was a podcast, became a 3-book series and a video series. So we're seeing a lot of these transitions of obviously book to screen and audiobook, but also podcast to book or
Yeah.
series to book and
Yeah.
book to podcast. And so what does this fluidity mean? Because again, this question of what is a podcast versus what is an audiobook
Sure.
comes into the picture in terms of execution of a book or like adaptation of a book in the audio format. So are
Right.
you seeing a lot of potential in this fluidity where, are you seeing at HarperCollins, like picking up basically podcasts to make book deals, or that fluidity increasing? And what do you think that means for the future for authors or for creators?
Definitely increasing, going by recent examples. I think I'm aware some contracts are still work in progress, but when we sort of acquire these books, it's done as part of a what we call in publishing as an acquisitions meeting, where where various stakeholders in the company, they sort of discuss and debate the merits, the challenges, the strengths of the book, and decide, okay, what we're going to offer on. I think the fluidity is great for a writer because it's taking their work to a new sort of format. I still feel that one must also focus on the adaptation when you're transitioning from one format to the other. So, for example, and I'm looking really on the micro stuff here, okay? I mean, the script for a podcast and the text on a page of a book, they are going to be different. When it's a podcast, you sort of choose, I mean, not very heavy words. It's a bit like, and I'm referencing my journalism days. So let's say two reporters have gone to report on a story at a specific crime scene. The text of the television reporter's voiceover is going to be a little different from the text of the print journalist voiceover. Similarly, for a podcast also, the text will be slightly different, and for the book, the text is going to be slightly different because it's appealing to the reader. I mean, the book is going to appeal to someone who's going to read it. Coming to a question about audiobooks and podcasts, I think the audiobook, by its conventional sense, should be a literal, straight reading of the book. Think of it as you basically hired a narrator to just read it for you. You've outsourced the job to him or her. Just read it out to me, and it's, you put your earphones on, you're probably walking or you're on the treadmill, and the book is being read to you. So you have that option to consume the author's work. If you'd like a little more dynamic approach to hearing the same story, you can go to the original podcast on which the book is based on. I mean, it'll have music, it'll have sound effects, it'll have dramatic pauses. If it's a horror podcast, it'll have a great background or a sound design. And it's really up to you. Maybe you probably want to listen to that maybe just before you go to bed, turn off the lights and listen to it.
But it's very interesting, a lot of audiobooks, not a lot, I guess a few audiobooks nowadays are also trying to put in these, sound effects or variations, or sort of add more essentially to the audiobook than the book, in order to make it interactive in a sense, or more engaging. I mean, the example I can think of was Malcolm Gladwell's last book, where I think they added a lot of like original music pieces in the middle, and they did a lot of things, which I think is blurring the line further and further. And I mean, I guess this is a criticism, but like I also sometimes there is this criticism of sometimes audiobooks sounding a little too dry, because like you said, right, it is a literal reading of the book, and the book has originally been written for someone to read it visually rather than listen to it. That it can, depending on the book, on the subject, on the way that it has been written, some books can be really difficult to get through as audiobooks.
Yeah, you're right. I think audiobooks are not for everyone. There's I mean, and audiobook apps have a sleep timer attached to them. So so it's as simple as this. If someone's going to talk nonstop for the next 20-30 minutes, you are likely to tune out. I think the decision to add a bit of music to the audio, or just musical cues to the narration, is a good thing to make it a bit more immersive. I remember the Malcolm Gladwell book you're referring to. In fact, I never thought of it as an audiobook. I thought it was produced with the production design of a podcast, but it's got an ISBN and it's selling as a book, which I think is terrific. Which means you really had the budget for that sort of a podcast and creation. And I mean that budget is a lot because it's expensive if you're actually going to record bytes from people, mix it. I mean there are multiple people working on that. It's I mean the book itself would probably be a different animal, but the podcast is like a different piece because it's got those recordings, it's got sound design, and it's more dynamic. And I think if a publisher can afford those budgets and do it, they should. I think in India, publishers are probably waiting for the market to mature a little bit more before they make those investments. Because I think if you look at the proportion of sales that are coming from the sale of audiobooks, it's still pretty small. Because in India, print sales continue to be sort of booming. The print book edition still is the most dominant edition of the book. When ebooks came into the Indian market, that we thought, oh my God, who's going to buy a print book anymore? And this is an observation made by almost every publisher in the country, that the proportion of ebook sales to the total royalties has not changed a lot in the last 10 years. And we're equally flummoxed and pleasantly surprised that the print book is still the preferred mode of consuming a book. So I'm saying that I don't think audio is going to really change that a lot, unless of course those investments are made. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, where I think if I need to increase audiobook sales, I have to offer a bit more of that dynamism or immersiveness to the audio, so that someone might say, hey, look, you know what, I've just heard this sample on Audible, and I think I'd prefer to listen to the audio version instead of reading the print edition because of whatever it is. And I think mobility has a lot to do with it. Let's say you don't find that time to really curl up and read a physical book, but maybe you are on the road. You can probably just, plug in and put in on your car speaker and listen to it. So the way I approach it is that, say, for example, Jay Shetty, Think Like a Monk, a rock star podcaster, a very good narrator, and he's narrated his own book, Think Like a Monk, and so his next book as well, 8 Rules of Love. Similarly, Barack Obama's memoir. Would you want to buy a really fat hardback edition, or would you want Mr. Obama to narrate the audio for you? I choose the latter. I think those are the ways you draw in more listeners to your format. And I think it's definitely a direction we are thinking a lot about at the moment, and even in the year ahead. I think you'll see some interesting experiments in audio where it'll be a convergence of music, sound design, interesting choice of narrators. You'll probably have multiple narrators for some books, because we'll probably see, okay, fine, what, if this book is very dialogue heavy, I don't want the same narrator to do multiple voices. And let's face it, not everyone is Stephen Fry, who could do it in Harry Potter. So you'll see a lot of interesting moves happen here. And I think that whole convergence that you spoke about, podcasts and audio, I think we will all borrow and shake hands in different formats to say, hey, you give me that, I'll give you this, you can take this from me. And so I think publishing as a business itself will interact a lot more with different kinds of companies. We'll interact maybe more with an Audible, with a Spotify, with Bound, and I think it'll be vice versa. So interesting times ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a very exciting space that all of these companies are getting into, where they're, sort of getting closer together. These different industries per se are getting closer together with these formats becoming so fluid. And I think even authors' approach to getting published is changing very massively because of that. Like I remember there's this Pakistani podcast called Notes on a Scandal. And I remember when only 1 or 2 episodes of the podcast were out. Again, it's like true story, true crime, the thing everyone loves right now. In audio, on screen, And they had only released a couple of episodes on the podcast. And I remember having a conversation with them where basically they were two journalists who were writing a book based on that particular story. And what they had done is the book was in progress and they had started this podcast as a way to get publishers' attention in order for the book to get picked up.
Sure.
So the podcast was ongoing and they were, simultaneously writing the book because it was the same research. So what they were doing was, like, obviously they would do the research. So the research they would do themselves, they would turn into narration for the podcast. And then when they would actually go and interview people for the book, right, they would record those audio
Recorded there.
clips. And again, so that would become the podcast. So it was the same research process, which was leading to two clear outputs, both simultaneously happening. And their book did get picked up by Rupa,
Right.
I think a few months ago.
Sure.
So just very interesting approach from authors and researchers themselves in terms of how they want to now approach multiple formats, right? Which is not, okay, write everything in one format and then adapt the entire thing, but in the process itself, looking at multiple formats.
Yeah, I think credit to the authors for having that foresight.
Yeah.
That, I'm going to use these recordings. So, I mean, they obviously would have carried the right kind of equipment to record those because it needs to be ready for
certain quality
for a podcast. Yeah.
Like Rumors, right now we're in talks with HarperCollins to make Rumors, Chandrama Das's podcast, into a book.
Sure.
Right, and that conversation is going on, and that has also been very interesting because she was originally a book writer, right? Like she wrote books. And so when I was working on this podcast with her and we were working on the scripts, we had to actually cut out a lot of information from season 1 scripts in order to make the episodes crisp for audio.
Understood.
So the kind of information that would be there in a book.
Yeah.
Like a lot of research, a lot of details, a lot of factual information, which we had to cut. And every conversation I would have with her would be cut this out, because there would be a lot to make those like longer research sort of things into 30-minute episodes.
Absolutely.
Right? And so now it's very funny because now it's like when the process of turning this back into a book would essentially be going to that first draft of the script and being like, okay, now this is the book level information, and then maybe we just need to add a little bit more to that.
Sure.
So I think that journey of adapting and what gets left and what gets removed in different formats to like fit that particular format of audio versus book versus is just very interesting when
it's interesting. And I think the end consumer is going to be very smart about this because I mean, technically they are listening to the podcast for free, unless of course they would be on, say, a subscription to, Spotify, or, I mean, you don't even need a subscription or a premium subscription to Spotify to listen to a podcast or, a Prime Music. But I think one needs to give us a bit of a value add when taking that same script to a different format. So if it's a podcast that's been converted to a book, you need to give something extra. And that extra doesn't need to be extra words or extra text, but an extra value add. I think there's a lot to learn from, say, Hollywood, for example, or the movie industry in the West, which introduced this concept of a director's cut. Or a DVD edition which has a track which has the director's commentary attached to it. There would be behind the scenes and bloopers, stuff like that, which is really fan service. I mean, you want that sort of you've probably seen the movie in a cinema hall, but you still want to own a copy of the DVD.
You want that extra stuff. You want to feel special.
You want I think that would give that edge so that the DVD sort of keeps on selling. I think in India, you've probably seen that in movies. I think back in the first decade of the new millennium, I remember Kaho Na Pyare had launched. And it was a massive hit. It was a blockbuster in the first 4 weeks. And I think in the 5th week, I saw a poster in that, page in the newspaper where all the movie listings would appear. And it said, now with a bonus track. And it was a song called Janeman Janeman, which was not part of the first cut that people saw in the cinema halls. And people were like, okay, it was a chart busting sort of an album. So people were thought, oh, there's a song we didn't know about. Let's go watch it again. I mean, I don't know if everyone sort of went for it, but But those are the tricks and tips people use to sort of say, okay, I've sort of maxed out what this film could do. What can I offer something extra? Is there an extra footage
that
or extra?
plus thing.
Yeah. So even for so let's say even when publishers we publish books, we let's say the first edition has come out in hardback. In the second edition, we say with a new foreword or with a new introduction by or it's got a little bit of bonus material, like it'll probably have a Q&A with the author. So we have a translations imprint called Harper Perennial, and I think we've traditionally had a Q&A with the translator towards the end of the book. It just helps you sort of deep dive into the translations approach to translating. What were their initial impressions? So we felt like that was a good value add. So it was like a trademark of a lot of the Harper Perennial books that we brought up. The interchangeability in content will be there, but I think one needs to be also mindful of offering something that's a bit extra. I think the number of copies selling would be limited if you're just transposing or transcribing and putting it into a book. So
what is your opinion about, because we're speaking about adaptation but in the same language, right? Say it's an English book, you adapt it in audio, you adapt it into an English audiobook. But there are a lot of these new companies or platforms coming up really focusing on, like, again, Indian language content, right? Whether it's especially audio content. I think obviously Indian languages books have existed forever, in all the different languages, and there's a huge sort of rich literature that India has that people who only read in English often don't get access to unless they actively read translations. But a lot of these platforms, like you have your Pocket FM, Coco FM, which are focusing on, like, their audiences are also very focused on smaller towns or cities and villages, and then they're also like taking a lot of regional or local books and turning them into audio. Is that something also that Harper is exploring, in the sense of looking at audio adaptations but also across languages?
Yes, we're working with both, actually, and we are open to language adaptations in all formats. So I think the entry of both the platforms that you named has, what it has done is that it's now given our audiobooks reach into parts of India where probably the incumbent platforms were finding difficult to reach, probably because of their pricing or the format in which you consume books. So I know Pocket, for example, has sachet pricing. You pay per chapter. It's a micropayments driven sort of a listening experience. So you pay, let's say you liked a chapter, you've paid like $10 for another chapter, and you're proceeding from there. You can, of course, buy the entire book. It gives you the option to do that. But I think sachet pricing allows people in parts of the country who cannot afford to pay for the full book to still experience the book and pay as you consume
and sample it, right, to see whether they feel like they want to pay the full amount, whether whether they find the book interesting enough to then invest that much money
and time. Correct. And I think the fact that both these platforms have got multiple rounds of funding is an indication that there is confidence that the listenership is growing. It's also a different kind of listenership. You're not purely singularly targeting just the metros or the cities. I mean, I travel, for example, a lot by the Delhi metro, and it is not uncommon to find someone listening to one of these apps, or or listening to or consume the content via, say, YouTube, where some form of adaptation of the app is there as a sampler. So the fact that a book can travel into multiple languages and these platforms are enabling that is great for the publishing industry as a whole, and also for authors, because earlier distribution used to be a challenge. Let's say I have licensed the Marathi rights of a book to a Marathi publisher. Let's say the lockdown has hit, and a Marathi publisher would typically depend on sales coming from Amazon bookshops that sell and stock Marathi books, and a lot of independent book fairs that would happen across Maharashtra, where, books would be sold at a slight discount. We did notice this, that during COVID, none of these fairs would happen because, COVID restrictions, COVID restrictions and other things, and, no funding, the businesses in the doldrums. So I think the fact that you do not need an on-ground distribution mechanism via these apps ensures that at least even at home, wherever the listener is, he's still getting a chance to consume that content.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why we, for example, began investing in our own audio and looking at audio with a lot more seriousness was because we realized that ebooks and audio are still formats where you do not need on-ground, distribution, or if you don't need the markets to be open, or you don't need bookshops to be open, so on and so forth. It's just all in the clouds, in the servers, and it's what we began to call no contact consumption. You can just ask Alexa to play it, and I think we noticed this also because when the first lockdown hit, obviously as an industry, we were anxious. I mean, we had a number of books that were scheduled for publication, and we had to say, we just need to pause this for a bit because, we can't do a proper marketing, we can't do, distribution. How are the books even going to reach the bookstores or the, warehouses?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you remember, I think some of us publishers, I think at that point of time, we began to allow the ebook editions to sort of, sell a bit more. So there was high discounting on the ebook editions, and ebook sales really, went through the roof around that time. But interestingly, because the US and the UK markets, because their business is not so dependent on the sale of the print edition, whatever shortfall the lockdown imposed, they made up for it with the sales of the ebook and audio editions.
Because that portion is anyways higher there.
Yeah. So, let's say 25% of a book's revenues come from the sale of the ebook edition, and 25% came from the ebook edition. Audio and ebook editions, 25% each. I think that ratio in the US and the UK, it probably went up to say, 50 to 60%. Because, books were considered non-essential items, and, you couldn't ship those. But, no one's stopping you from really downloading an audiobook, right? Or no one's stopping you from downloading a book. So I think they realized how valuable that whole inventory in the catalog was, that all that money that was invested in, creating audiobooks and making sure the ebooks were available. In fact, I remember a lot of language publishers in India who probably never had an ebook production plan because, they had followed the traditional route of publishing, print book, kafi hai, theek hai. But they began to look at ebooks a lot more seriously. They said, okay, you know what, had our ebooks been there, people may have been able to download these ebooks and, sell it for those months when it was pretty tough.
Yeah.
I think the format agnostic approach is very crucial for the future of publishing, that, people are going to consume it the way they want. I have a Kindle. I don't have space in my house to buy any more physical books. So I'm just going to stick to my Kindle. And, maybe, if I've got a good narrator whom I like, who's narrating the audio, I'll probably stick to the, audio edition. But I think not a lot of publishers are still investing in audio production. We're selective. We're not doing all our books in audio. But
how many books are you converting to audio, say, in a year?
In a year would be tough, but I think at least half our catalog or annual list would go into audio. It all depends also on the genre and the ambition behind the book in terms of, what are the kind of sales we're expecting. Because not all genres do well. Fiction, I'm surprised it does not do very well as an audio book per se. I mean, if I do a podcast with multiple voices and, like how, say, Audible approaches originals, that would be a different beast.
Yeah,
But
I think fiction is challenging because, like you said, it needs multiple people to kind of like have those multiple voices for people to recognize that
yeah,
they're different characters. I think it goes back to the radio drama,
yeah,
like BBC used to have a lot of these radio dramas,
yeah,
like that approach.
correct.
And then also one thing I've realized with audio, like fiction audio uh, narratives, is that usually in books there are a lot of characters, right? Because an author is writing a book, and in a book you can have multiple characters.
Sure.
Obviously, and that's sort of how the building in the book happens. But
Yeah.
in audio, like when someone is writing fiction for audio, it is very important to limit the number of characters, because every additional character is such a huge addition to the
Sure.
production cost
Yeah.
of creating that audio thing, that usually they would have like only 2 characters, only
Yeah.
3 characters.
Yeah.
No, and I think that also makes it a little difficult to adapt
Correct.
fiction for audio, definitely.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Book People. But there's more to come. So my conversation with Arcopol was so amazing that this episode is actually going to have a part 2. So we're going to be releasing a part 2 next week, where I continue speaking to Arcopol, and he actually talks about, how much revenue HarperCollins is actually making with audiobooks. And he also addresses this new trend that is happening in India right now, where authors are trying to retain their audio rights instead of signing them off to the publishers. And so he is able to provide a publisher's perspective on that. So for all of these topics and much more, make sure to tune in next week for part 2 of this conversation with Arcopol. This podcast is created by Bound. We work with writers and brands to create content across formats, whether it's books, podcasts, newsletters, or screenplays. So get in touch to see how we can help you grow through stories. And follow us at Bound India on all social media platforms. I'm your host, Aishwarya. You can follow me on LinkedIn, where I share many more insights about books and content. Or you can get in touch with me at aishwarya@boundindia.com if you have any suggestions on topics I should cover, or if you want to book any of my services or consultation calls. Until then, keep writing.